Evelyn Harper set her paintbrush down on the dining table quietly. Deliberately, the way a woman sets down something she has carried too long, and walked out of the room without a single word, while her husband's voice still rang through the house. Warm and proud, thanking a woman named Margaret for everything Evelyn had built with her own 2 hands. Margaret had been gone for 5 years. Evelyn had been invisible for 8. If this story lives somewhere inside you, subscribe, follow every part until the end, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. The letter was already half written in her head before she sat down to write it. That was the part that would stay with Evelyn longest, not the moment at the dinner table. Not her husband's voice saying the wrong name in front of 12 people. Not the long walk back to the kitchen afterward with her hands perfectly steady and her face perfectly composed. What would stay with her was the realization, sitting alone at the small desk in the room off the kitchen at midnight, that she already knew what she was going to say, that the words had been waiting inside her for a long time. Patient and exact, like water behind a dam that had finally found its crack. She had not planned to leave tonight, but she understood now that some part of her had been planning it for years. She picked up her pen. 3 weeks earlier, she had walked into Nathaniel's study and sat down across from his desk without being invited, which was something she rarely did anymore. A dinner, she said. Before he could look up. Before the weather turns. Nathaniel set down his pen. He looked at her with the expression she knew best, not dismissal. Not interest, but the narrow middle ground between them. The look of a man calculating cost before he knows the price. What kind of dinner? The kind that gets you those Louisville contracts before the season closes. She kept her voice even. Practical, the way she'd learned to pitch ideas to him. Not as requests. The Holts, the Caldwells. 3 merchants from Louisville: Patterson, Greer, and the younger Fitzjudge Abernathy if he'll come. 2 neighboring landowners whose opinion carries weight. We feed them well. You talk about spring contracts. By the time dessert comes, they've already decided. He was quiet for a moment. That's considerable organizing. I'll handle it, she said. He nodded once and looked back down at his papers. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and left the room. The door closed behind her, and she stood in the hallway for a moment. Her hand still on the frame, and she thought, he didn't ask me a single question. Not one. Not what she had in mind for the menu. Not how she intended to get Judge Abernathy to accept Abernathy, who hadn't attended a social function in 2 years and turned down invitations from men twice as powerful as Nathaniel Whitaker. Not even a "thank you, Evelyn, that's a good idea." Just, "I'll handle it," and a nod. She let go of the doorframe and went to find Bess. She spent 3 weeks making something out of nothing, the way she always did. The invitations went out by hand, Thomas Reed driving into town on her instructions, though Nathaniel thought it had been Thomas's own initiative. She had written each invitation differently. Patterson's mentioned a mutual connection in Louisville she'd remembered from 2 years ago. A name she'd filed away the way she filed everything. Quietly and precisely. Judge Abernathy's was different from all the rest. She had read every public record of his recent rulings, studied his particular obsession's land tenure, the integrity of county records, fair contract law, and she had written him a letter that spoke directly to those things. Not flattery. Substance, the kind of letter a man like Abernathy received maybe twice in a decade. He accepted within 4 days, when Nathaniel mentioned it at breakfast. Surprised and pleased, she said only, "I thought he might." He didn't ask how she'd known. She ordered provisions from 2 merchants in Louisville, separately the beef from Callaway's, the wine from Hester Brothers, which was expensive, but the kind of expensive that made certain men feel honored rather than entertained. She reorganized the dining room herself, moving furniture until the proportions felt right, airing linens that hadn't been touched since the previous winter. She spent 2 full afternoons with Bess over the menu, working through 7 versions before settling on something that would feel generous without feeling showy. There was a difference. She understood it instinctively. She also, in the evenings, over the course of a week, briefed Nathaniel. Not in any formal way. She would sit near him while he read and she would speak, as if thinking aloud about things she'd learned about each guest. Abernathy's views on grazing rights. Patterson's history with a previous land deal that had gone badly and left him cautious. The fact that the younger Fitch deferred heavily to Greer and would likely follow his lead on any contract decision. She shaped what she knew into the kind of information that made a man feel prepared. Feel sharp. Feel like he had studied the room before he entered it. She gave him all of it as if it were nothing. He received it as if it were his own. That night, standing in front of the hallway mirror in her pale blue dress with the ivory lace she'd sewn along the collar, her own work, her own hands, she looked at herself for a long moment. She was 28 years old. She looked older, but not in a ruined way. In the way of a woman who had been spending herself for a long time on a life that didn't spend anything back. Her eyes were the thing she noticed most. They were her mother's eyes. Dark and steady, and they looked like the eyes of someone who had gotten very good at waiting without knowing they were waiting. She hadn't painted in 11 months. She turned away from the mirror and went downstairs. The guests arrived between 6 and half past, and Evelyn was at the door for all of them. She greeted Patterson first, broad, direct, good-natured, the kind of man who liked people, who didn't waste his time, and she said, "Mr. Patterson, I understand your family recently moved to the larger house on Elm. Congratulations. That's a beautiful part of Louisville." She watched his face open with genuine pleasure. The pleasure of a man who didn't expect to be remembered. "You've done your homework, Mrs. Whitaker," he said, laughing. "We try to make our guests feel welcome," she said simply. Judge Abernathy was last. He was a wide, serious man with a silver watch chain across his vest, expression of someone permanently unimpressed. He shook her hand with formality. "Mrs. Whitaker, Judge Abernathy. I appreciated your ruling in the Hargrove case last spring. I thought your interpretation of prior claim was unusually precise." He paused. Looked at her with something different in his eyes, not quite surprise, but a recalibration. "You followed that case? I find land law more interesting than most people give it credit for," she said. "Please come in." She felt his eyes on her back as she led him through the door. Behind her, she heard Nathaniel saying, "Abernathy, good of you to come," in the warm, easy voice that came so naturally to him. And she thought, he has no idea how that man got here tonight. She went to check on the wine. The dinner moved exactly the way she had designed it to move. When Gerald Holt, Nathaniel's longest business partner, a man who talked at volume and listened at low, started to crowd Patterson with acreage numbers and projected yields, Evelyn slid into the conversation from the side. "Mr. Patterson," she said, "I heard your eldest started at the university in Lexington. That must be a proud moment." Patterson turned to her instantly, grateful, and the conversation opened wide enough for Gerald to breathe and for the merchant to feel like a person instead of a target. When the room started to separate into 2 conversations that were pulling in different directions, she moved between them like water, carrying a phrase from one to the other, finding the thread that connected them, weaving the room back into one without anyone seeing the weave. When she caught Bess's signal from the kitchen, a slight tilt of the head, barely perceptible, she shifted the whole party toward the dining table by simply standing and saying to the nearest guest, "I believe Bess is ready for us," and within 3 minutes 12 people were seated as if they'd decided it themselves. She sat at the foot of the table. Nathaniel sat at the head. The length of the table between them, the same as always. She ate almost nothing. She was too busy watching Nathaniel work the room with that easy confidence she had once fallen in love with. watching Abernathy lean slightly forward when Nathaniel made the point about grazing rights that she had coached him through 4 evenings ago. Watching Patterson's shoulders relax with each course. Everything was working. Everything was going exactly as she had planned. She should have felt something like satisfaction. She didn't feel anything at all. The question came near the end of the meal. Patterson leaned back in his chair, the posture of a man who had eaten well and was feeling generous, and looked around the table with genuine appreciation. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "I'll be honest with you. I've been to a good many ranch dinners, and most of them feel exactly like what they are, a sales pitch, dressed up in good linen. This one doesn't." He paused, and the table went quiet in that particular way that happens when everyone is listening while pretending not to. Everything tonight has a quality to it. Real quality. The food, the conversation, the way the evening's been run. I want to know who you have that makes this place work the way it does. 12 people were looking at Nathaniel. Evelyn was looking at the candle flame in front of her. She knew what was coming. She didn't know she knew it until the half-second before it happened. When she felt her hands go still in her lap, not in anticipation, but in the way the body goes still when it already understands something the mind hasn't caught up to yet. Nathaniel smiled, the easy, confident smile she had watched 1,000 times. He looked around the table, and he said, "Margaret has done a wonderful job keeping everything together. We're very fortunate to have her." The table responded warmly. Holt nodded. One of the neighboring landowners said, "Good help is hard to find," with the satisfaction of a man who believed he was agreeing with something wise. Patterson looked pleased. The question answered to his satisfaction. The room moved on. Evelyn did not move. She sat at the foot of the table with her hands in her lap, and she looked at the candle flame and she felt the words land inside her. Quiet and complete, the way a key turns in a lock. Margaret. Margaret, who had been the housekeeper. Stout, efficient, reliable Margaret from Lexington, who had supervised the kitchen accounts and the 2 house girls, and who had left in the autumn of 1870 when her mother fell ill and never returned. Evelyn had written her a reference letter, a generous one. Because that was the kind of woman Evelyn was. She had reorganized the household herself in the weeks after Margaret left and had never hired a replacement because by that point she was doing all of it anyway. And no one had ever suggested that was unusual. That was 5 years ago. Margaret had been gone for 5 years, and Nathaniel Whitaker had just offered her name to a room full of men as the answer to the question of what made his house extraordinary. Not Evelyn, not his wife, not the woman at the foot of the table who had pulled his ranch back from the edge of insolvency 2 winters ago, who had found the error buried in the grain contracts. The kind of error that ruined men quietly, and had renegotiated the terms through a Louisville intermediary before the loss had time to become public. Not the woman who kept his ledgers in handwriting so clear and precise that the bank had once asked Nathaniel who his accountant was. Not the woman who had written Judge Abernathy a letter so carefully crafted that a man who hadn't attended a social event in 2 years had driven 14 miles in October to sit at this table. Margaret, who hadn't set foot on this property since Evelyn Harper Whitaker was 23 years old. Evelyn picked up her wine glass. She took one small, careful sip. She set it down. She said, "Nothing. It's the table." Nathaniel was already laughing at something Holt said. After the guests left, she cleaned up. Nobody asked her to. Nobody offered to help. It was simply what happened. The way sunrise happened, the way the seasons changed, inevitable. Unremarked upon, assumed. Nathaniel came through the dining room once. His collar loosened, his face still carrying the pleasant glow of an evening that had gone well. "Good night," he said. "I think Patterson's going to sign." "I think so too," Evelyn said. He looked at her for exactly as long as it takes a man to confirm that nothing requires his attention. "You look tired," he said. "Don't stay up too long." "I won't," she said. He went upstairs. She stood alone in the dining room, with the wreckage of the evening around her, the used glasses, the melted candles, the crumpled linens, and she thought, clearly and without drama, that in the entire evening, across 3 hours and 12 guests, and a dinner she had built from nothing, her husband had not once said her name. Not once. She began to clear the table. She washed the crystal by hand at the kitchen basin. Slowly, the warm water moving over her hands, the lamplight shifting on the soap. Bess had gone home. The house was quiet. Outside, somewhere past the stable, she could hear one of the horses moving in the dark. She set the last glass on the drying cloth. She dried her hands. She stood very still for a moment, in the middle of the kitchen, in the middle of the quiet, and she made no decision. Decisions are things you wrestle with, things that cost you something to reach. This was not a decision. This was simply the moment when she stopped pretending. She had been invisible, not cruelly made so, not deliberately. Nathaniel Whitaker was not a cruel man. He had never raised his voice at her, never treated her with contempt, never been unkind in ways that left marks you could name. He was a good man who had married a capable woman and had mistaken her capability for contentment and her silence for satisfaction, and had never once thought to ask the difference. She had let him mistake it. That was the part she had to sit with. She had agreed to this. Inch by inch, year by year, in 1,000 small surrenders she had told herself were compromises. She had agreed to be useful rather than seen. She had agreed to fold her ambitions into the shape of his life and call that love. She had agreed so thoroughly and for so long that she had almost forgotten what she had agreed away. Almost. The small room off the kitchen was cold. She lit a lamp and stood in the middle of it and looked at the canvas propped against the wall. A half-finished field soft lavender, pale gold, the particular quality of light at early morning that she used to wake before dawn to catch. 8 months of dust on it. Maybe more. She walked to it. She lifted it. She held it toward the lamp and looked at it for a long time. She had started painting at 11 years old. It had been the truest thing about her for as long as she could remember, truer than being a daughter, truer than being a wife, truer than being useful and capable and quiet. When she painted, she was not performing anything for anyone. She was simply herself, exactly herself, the most complete version of the thing she actually was. She had set it aside so gradually that there had never been a moment she could point to and say, "There, that is when I stopped." It had just slowly become the thing she was going to return to. Later, when there was time, when things settled, she set the canvas down. She opened the drawer where her brushes were wrapped in cloth, and she took them out one by one and laid them on the table. 6 brushes. She had bought them in Richmond before the marriage, at a shop on Franklin Street that smelled of linseed oil and varnish. She had taken better care of these than of almost anything else she owned. She picked up the largest one. She held it in her hand. She was not going to paint tonight. It was too late, and the lamps were too low, and she was too tired. But she held the brush, and she thought about what her mother had told her once. Only once, with the directness that her mother saved for things that mattered. A woman who spends all of herself on a life that wasn't built with her in mind will one day look in the mirror and find a stranger there. She had looked in the mirror tonight. She knew the face that looked back. She set the brush down. Then she picked it up again and wrapped it carefully in its cloth. The way you wrap things you're going to carry somewhere. She wrapped all 6, one by one, and put them in her coat pocket. She sat down at the small writing desk. She picked up her pen. She wrote clearly and without stopping. The way she wrote everything: ledgers, correspondence, contracts, precise and unambiguous, leaving no room for misreading. She wrote that she was not leaving because of a name spoken at a dinner table. She wrote, "I am leaving because tonight made me see clearly something I have been refusing to see for a long time. I have given 8 years of myself to a life that was never built to include me as a person, only as a function. I do not believe you meant for that to happen. I do not believe you are a cruel man. But I have been disappearing for a very long time, Nathaniel, and I find that I am not willing to disappear completely. She wrote, the accounts are in order. The spring grain contracts have been renewed at the renegotiated terms. Thomas Reed has the documents and knows where everything is kept. Judge Abernathy will likely be an asset to you in the spring if you follow up in the next 3 weeks. Patterson will sign. Give him a week. She wrote, I wish you no harm. I mean that fully. She did not write that she still loved him. She did not write the other thing, the harder thing. The thing she was not yet sure of herself, whether what she felt was love, or the memory of love, or simply the long and exhausting habit of a woman who had stopped asking herself the question years ago and had never found a quiet enough moment to start again. She folded the letter. She wrote his name on the outside in her clear, careful script, Nathaniel. Just his name, nothing else. She packed in the dark by lamplight, moving quietly through the upstairs rooms while he slept. Less was hers than she'd expected. The realization was its own small grief. Her clothes, the brushes in her coat pocket, her mother's portrait, small enough to tuck under one arm, 3 books, her grandmother's earrings. The money, 2 years of careful saving, small amounts folded into an envelope, kept between the pages of a ledger old enough that no one would think to open it. It was not a large sum. It was enough to begin something. She did not take the blue dress. She folded it and left it on the chair. And she didn't let herself think about why. She wrapped the half-finished canvas in cloth. She carried everything downstairs in 2 trips, stepping over the board in the hallway that creaked, moving through the dark house with the certainty of a woman who knew every inch of a place she was leaving. She stood in the front room. The dining table was clean. The crystal was washed and put away. The chairs were straight. Every candle was cold. The room looked exactly as it always did, perfect. Ordered, tended, and it occurred to her that it would look the same tomorrow and the day after, because she had built systems careful enough to run without her for a while. And he would not notice she was gone until systems started to fail. She thought about that. She picked up her bag. She opened the front door. The air outside was cold and sharp, carrying cut grass and wood smoke and the particular dark smell of horses sleeping. The stars were still out. The eastern sky was just barely beginning to lighten, not dawn yet, not even close. Just the first faint suggestion that somewhere behind the horizon, morning was forming itself. Evelyn stood on the porch. She breathed in the cold air and held it. She was 28 years old. She had a wrapped canvas under one arm, 6 brushes in her coat pocket. A letter she'd meant to finish for years now, finally written. And enough money to start again. She was more frightened than she had ever been in her life. She was more awake. She stepped off the porch without looking back. She walked down the road into the space between night and morning. And behind her the house stood silent and ordered and perfectly kept. And inside it Nathaniel Whitaker slept in the last quiet hour before the weight of everything he had never seen came down on him all at once, not like a blow, but like a door swinging slowly open onto a room he had never thought to enter. And finding it empty, and understanding finally, too late, what had been kept there. The road into Schiltefil, 14 miles of hard dirt and cold morning air. And Evelyn walked the first 3 of them alone before a farm wagon heading east slowed beside her. The driver was an old man with a white beard and the careful eyes of someone who had seen enough of the world to know when a woman walking alone before dawn was not doing it for pleasure. "You heading into town, ma'am?" "I am," she said. He looked at her bag, at the wrapped canvas under her arm. He didn't ask. "Climb up, then," he said. "Cold morning for walking." She climbed up. They rode in silence for a long time, which suited her. The old man asked no questions, and she offered no explanations, and somewhere around the 7th mile, with the sky beginning to go pale gold ahead of them, She felt the last of the Whitaker Ranch fall away behind her, like a coat she'd been wearing so long she'd forgotten it wasn't her own skin. She did not feel free yet. She felt exposed, raw the way a wound feels when the bandage finally comes off and the air hits it. Not better. Not worse, just real in a way it hadn't been before. The old man set her down at the edge of Shelbyville, just as the town was starting to wake. He tipped his hat, asked for nothing, and drove on. She stood on the main street with her bag at her feet and her canvas under her arm, and she looked at the town modest. Plain, the kind of place that minded its own business, and she thought, all right, start here. She found a boarding house on the second street. She tried. The woman who ran it was named Mrs. Adeline Pruitt, 50s. Sharp-eyed, with the no-nonsense quality of someone who had run a household on her own terms for a long time, and was not impressed by much. She looked at Evelyn on her doorstep, looked at the bag, looked at the canvas and said, "You running from something or running toward something?" "Toward," Evelyn said. Without hesitating, Mrs. Pruitt studied her for a moment longer. "Rooms $4 a month. Breakfast included. No gentlemen callers after 8. That won't be a problem," Evelyn said. "Didn't think so." Mrs. Pruitt stepped back from the door. "Come in then." The room was small, one window, one narrow bed. One table with 2 legs slightly shorter than the other 2. Evelyn set her canvas against the wall, her bag on the floor, and her coat on the hook behind the door, and she stood in the middle of the room, and she thought, "This is mine. All of it. Every inch of it is mine." She sat down on the edge of the bed. She put her face in her hands. She did not cry for long. She had never been a woman who cried for long. Her mother had been the same way. Had always said that grief was entitled to its moment, but not to the whole afternoon. So she let it have its moment, the full weight of it. 8 years of it pressing down all at once, and then she pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed. And when she lifted her head, the room was still there, small and plain and entirely hers, and she thought, "Good. Now figure out what comes next." What came next was money. That was the first and most immediate problem, and she had always been better at problems than at feelings. So she was almost grateful for it. She had enough saved to last 3 months. Maybe 4 if she was careful. She needed income before that ran out. She took stock of what she had. She could keep accounts better than most men she'd ever met. And she knew it without arrogance because the ledgers didn't lie. She could teach reading, arithmetic, basic correspondence. She could paint, though selling paintings was not something she'd ever done, and she had no idea yet whether anyone in Shelbyville would pay money for art when they could spend it on something useful. She started with the accounts. She walked into the general store on her second day in town, a place called Mercer's, run by a short, harried man named Douglas Mercer, who had ink stains on both hands and the look of someone perpetually behind, and she waited until the morning rush thinned. "And then," she said, "Mr. Mercer, I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed 3 errors in the pricing board near your door. The kind of errors that cost you money over time." Mercer stopped, stared at her. "What errors?" she told him. Specifically, clearly, without condescension. He stared at her for another long moment. "You do accounts?" "I do," she said. He hired her on the spot for 6 hours a week, which wasn't enough to live on but was a start, and more importantly, it got her a reputation. Within 2 weeks, the dry goods merchant 2 streets overheard about the woman at Pruitt's boarding house who could find errors in accounts that had been sitting wrong for years. And he sent his boy over with a note asking if she was available. She was. She said yes to everything in those first weeks. She kept accounts for Mercer and for the dry goods merchant, and for a small hotel near the edge of town whose owner, a taciturn man named Gill, had been hemorrhaging money for 2 years without knowing exactly where it was going. She found where it was going in 3 afternoons. He gave her a bonus she hadn't asked for and told 2 other business owners about her before the week was out. She was useful. She had always been useful. But this time, The usefulness was hers. The money went into her own envelope. Her own savings, her own future. Nobody nodded and moved on. Nobody said, "Thank you, Margaret." When Mr. Gill shook her hand and said, "Mrs. Whitaker, you've done this business a genuine service," she felt the words land differently than they ever had before, not with the familiar hollow echo of labor unacknowledged, but with something that sat solid in her chest, like a stone that actually had weight. She kept the room at Pruitt's. She kept her expenses small. And every evening, when the accounting work was done, she painted. She had not expected how much it would hurt to start again. The first evening she set up her materials on the small table by the window. She sat in front of the blank canvas for 40 minutes and did not make a single mark. Her hands felt wrong. Her eye felt wrong. 8 months of not painting had left a stiffness in her that went deeper than the hands, a kind of silence in the part of her that used to speak in color and form without effort. She almost put it away. She almost told herself she'd try again tomorrow, which was the thing she'd been telling herself for 11 months. And she knew, with the clarity that comes from finally stopped lying to yourself about the small things, that tomorrow was how it had gotten to 11 months in the first place. So she picked up the brush. She made a mark. It was wrong. She made another. Also wrong. She kept going. And the wrongness accumulated on the canvas in a way that made her jaw tight with frustration. And she kept going anyway, because the only way out of the stiffness was through it. And she had come too far and given up too much to let her own rustiness stop her now. By the third evening it was a little better. By the 10th, she had finished something for the first time in nearly a year. It was not one of her best pieces, she knew that. The light in the middle distance was slightly off, the horizon line a fraction too high, but it was finished. It was complete. It was the first thing she had made entirely for herself in as long as she could remember. And she propped it against the wall and looked at it in the lamplight and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. She felt like herself, not like Nathaniel Whitaker's wife. Not like the woman who kept the accounts and smoothed the conversations and made everything run. Like Evelyn. Like the 11-year-old girl who had cried over a set of watercolors because being seen, truly seen, even just by herself, was that overwhelming. She pressed her hand flat against the canvas. She said very quietly, to no one, "There you are, Mrs." Pruitt knocked on her door on a Thursday evening in the third week, which she hadn't done before. "Someone asking after you," she said. When Evelyn opened it, her tone was careful, neutral. The tone of a woman who had learned not to make assumptions. Evelyn's chest tightened. "Who?" "Young man. Says his name is Reed. Thomas Reed. Says he worked at the Whitaker Ranch." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She looked past Mrs. Pruitt toward the staircase, as if she could see through walls. "Send him up," she said. Thomas Reed was 42. Lean, weathered, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors, and the kind of eyes that had spent those same decades seeing more than he ever said out loud. He had worked the Whitaker Ranch since before Evelyn arrived. He had seen everything. He had never once spoken of what he saw, which was a quality she had always respected in him. He held his hat in both hands when he came in. He looked at her, at the room, at the canvas on the wall, at the accounting papers spread on the table, and his expression did something complicated that he quickly smoothed over. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said. "Thomas." She gestured to the chair. "Sit down. Tell me why you're here." He sat. He turned his hat in his hands once. "Twice he sent me," he said. "Mr. Whitaker asked me to find you, I see." She kept her voice even. "And did he send a message or just you?" "Both." Thomas reached into his coat and produced a letter. She did not take it immediately. She looked at it in his hand for a moment. At the familiar weight of that envelope, at her name written in Nathaniel's broad, careless script so different from hers, she had always thought. So confident in its lack of precision, she took it. She did not open it. How long did it take him to notice? She asked. Thomas was quiet for a moment. The morning accounts, he said carefully. He went to ask you something about the grain ledger. Second morning. 2 days, she said. Yes, ma'am. She set the letter on the table. And how is the ranch, Thomas? He hesitated. That hesitation told her more than any answer would have. There's some confusion, he said, with the accounts. Mr. Whitaker's been trying to manage the morning ledger himself. And Thomas started again. He's finding it more complicated than he expected. I imagine he is, Evelyn said. Without satisfaction. Without any particular feeling at all. The spring grain contracts are in the green folder, in the second drawer. The quarterly accounts are organized by month, and the notation system is explained on the inside cover of the ledger. I left everything as clear as I could. He knows, Thomas said. He found it. Another pause. He didn't know there was a notation system. Didn't know there was a green folder. Didn't know about most of it. Mrs. Whitaker. That's the honest truth of it. Evelyn looked at her hands. Did he read my letter? She asked. Yes, ma'am. Did he understand it? Thomas turned his hat very slowly in his hands. I think, he said, choosing his words with the same care he chose everything, that he understood it better than he wants to. That's different from being ready to act on it. She nodded. Thank you for coming, Thomas. I mean that. Are you? He stopped. Looked at the canvas on the wall, at the accounting papers, at the room that was small and plain and very clearly, in every arrangement of its modest contents, exactly what she had chosen. Are you all right? The question was so direct, so genuine, so unlike the careful professional distance he had always maintained, that it caught her off guard. She felt something move in her chest, not grief. Not gratitude, but something between the two. I'm more all right than I've been in a long time, she said. That's an honest answer. He nodded, stood, held his hat at his side. There's one more thing, he said. Not from Mr. Whitaker. From me. He seemed to be deciding something. I've been at that ranch for 11 years. Mrs. Whitaker, I've seen what you did there. All of it. And I want you to know that at least one person who was there knows exactly whose work it was. Evelyn looked at him. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Thank you, Thomas, she said finally. And her voice was steady, but only just. He put his hat on. He walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the frame the same way she had. 3 weeks ago, outside Nathaniel's study. He's going to come himself, Thomas said. Sooner or later. I thought you should know that. I know, she said. He left. She sat alone in the room for a long time after she heard his boots on the stairs. Then she picked up Nathaniel's letter, and she held it, and she thought about opening it, and she set it back down. Not yet. She wasn't ready to let his voice into this space yet. This space that was hers, that she had built inch by inch over 3 weeks from nothing. That still smelled faintly of the linseed oil from her paints, and the old wood of the table, and the particular quietness of a place where no one needed anything from her. She would read it, just not tonight. She picked up her brush instead. Clara Bennett arrived on a Saturday, unannounced, with a carpet bag, and the expression of a woman who has made a decision and is not interested in being talked out of it. Clara had been Evelyn's closest friend since girlhood, since Richmond. Since the years before the marriage, since the time when Evelyn had been simply Evelyn and not anyone's wife. They had written each other regularly over the 8 years of the marriage. Long, careful letters, and Evelyn had always written back with the same careful quality she brought to everything, honest enough to be real. Guarded enough to protect Nathaniel from her own doubts. Clara had always read between the lines. You look thinner, Clara said. The moment Evelyn opened the boarding house door. And you have paint on your left hand and ink on your right. Which means you've been working, which means you're going to be all right. Which is the only thing I actually needed to know. Evelyn laughed. A real laugh, the kind that starts in the stomach. She hadn't laughed like that in longer than she could remember. "Come in," she said. "I'm not staying," Clara said. "I have to be back to my sister's by Sunday evening. But I needed to see you with my own eyes." She stepped inside. She looked at the room. She took it in, all of it. The smallness, the plainness, the canvas on the wall. The papers on the table, the 6 brushes laid out in order of size on the windowsill, because that was just what Evelyn did, and her expression did something very particular. It softened in a way that meant she was working hard not to cry. "It suits you," Clara said. "The room? All of it." She looked at the canvas on the wall, the finished one. The first one, the light slightly off and the horizon a fraction too high. "Evelyn, that's beautiful. It's not my best work. I didn't say it was your best work. I said it was beautiful." Clara turned to her. "There's a difference. Your best work will come. This one is beautiful because it's the first thing you've made that belongs entirely to you." Evelyn looked at the canvas. "I said that," she said quietly. "To myself. Almost exactly that. Because it's true." Clara sat down on the edge of the bed, the way she'd always sat on the edge of Evelyn's bed since they were girls, with the ease of someone who simply belonged wherever her friend was. "Now tell me everything, from the beginning." So Evelyn told her. She told her about the dinner and the name Margaret and the moment at the table when she hadn't moved and hadn't cried and hadn't done anything except pick up her wine glass and take a small, careful sip. She told her about the letter and the packing and the road in the dark and the old man in the wagon. She told her about Mrs. Pruitt and Mr. Mercer and Mr. Gill. She told her about Thomas Reed and the letter from Nathaniel that was still unread on the table. Clara listened all the way through without interrupting, which was one of the things Evelyn had always loved most about her. When she finished, Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know people are talking. I assumed they would be. The story going around is that you left because you'd lost your mind. Mrs. Gerald Holt told her sister-in-law that you'd had some kind of episode." Clara's voice was dry. "Mrs. Caldwell thinks there must be another man involved." "Of course she does," Evelyn said. "And Nathaniel." Clara stopped, chose her next words. "Nathaniel is telling people that you're visiting a sick relative. He's holding that story as long as he can." Evelyn looked at her hands. "How long do you think it'll hold?" "Not long. People already think it's strange you'd travel in October without your husband." Clara paused. "Evelyn, are you prepared for what happens when it stops holding? Because this town, this county, is going to have opinions. And not all of them are going to be kind ones." "I know," Evelyn said. "You know in theory," Clara said, not unkindly. "Knowing and living it are different things." "Clara," Evelyn looked at her directly. "I kept that man's accounts for 8 years. I saved his ranch from a debt collapse that would have taken everything. I organized his household, his correspondence, his social calendar, his business relationships. I did it all without complaint, without credit, without anyone in that county, including my husband, thinking to ask whether I had something of my own I might want to be doing." She stopped. "I have lived for 8 years with people not seeing me clearly. I can manage a few more months of it." Clara looked at her for a long moment. Then she said softly, "Yes, you can." They sat together in the small room as the afternoon light moved through the window and across the floor. And Clara told her the other things, the smaller, warmer things, the gossip and the news and the things that had nothing to do with any of this. And for a little while Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years. She felt accompanied, not managed, not needed, not useful. Just accompanied, by someone who saw her and wanted nothing from what she saw except to be near it. Clara left before dark. She hugged Evelyn at the door, a real hug, the kind that holds on, and she said, "Write to me. Every week." "Every week," Evelyn said. "And read the letter," Clara said. "You need to know what he said." Evelyn said nothing. "You're afraid of what's in it," Clara said. It wasn't a question. I'm afraid it'll make me feel something I'm not ready to feel yet, Evelyn said honestly. Clara nodded. Read it anyway, she said. You've always been better at hard things than you give yourself credit for. She squeezed Evelyn's hand once. Hard. And let go. I'll see you soon. Evelyn watched her go down the street until she turned the corner and disappeared. Then she went upstairs. She sat at the table. She picked up the letter. His handwriting was careless the way it always was, large. Confident, taking up more space on the page than it needed to. The way Nathaniel took up space in most things. He wrote, Evelyn, I don't know how to begin this. I've started it 4 times. She read that line twice. He wrote, I read your letter. I have read it many times. I want you to know that. I don't say that to make you feel obligated. I say it because I want you to understand that I am trying to hear what you said. And that trying is harder than I expected, and I think that says something about me that I am not comfortable with. He wrote, I went to use the ledger on the second morning. I couldn't find what I needed. I spent most of the day looking for things that were apparently in front of me the whole time. Organized in a system I didn't know existed because I never asked. He wrote, I didn't know about the grain contracts. Thomas told me what you had done, the error you found. The renegotiation. I didn't know. And I should have known, and the fact that I didn't is the kind of thing that keeps me up at night now. She set the letter down. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. She sat like that for a long moment. Then she picked the letter back up. He wrote, I am not asking you to come back. I don't think I've earned the right to ask that yet. I'm writing because I needed you to know that I am sitting with what you said, really sitting with it, and it is uncomfortable in a way I don't know how to describe. And I think that discomfort is something I owe you the honesty of feeling rather than escaping. He wrote, I said Margaret's name. I have thought about that every day since I read your letter. 8 years, Evelyn. I don't have an explanation that makes that better. I only have the fact that I am finally too late, asking myself why, and I don't like the answers I'm finding. The letter ended there. No request, no promise, no declaration. Just I hope you are well. I mean that, and Evelyn sat with it for a long time. She felt many things, layered over each other in a way that was hard to separate. She felt grief, not fresh grief, but old grief, the kind that has been waiting for an opening. She felt something that was close to compassion, which surprised her. She felt unexpectedly a kind of relief, because the man who had written this letter was not entirely the man she had been afraid she had imagined. There was something real in it, something honest. Whether it was enough, whether anything was enough, she didn't know yet, and didn't need to know tonight. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer under her mother's portrait. She sat for a moment, her hand on the drawer. Then she opened her paint box. She did not paint Nathaniel. She did not paint the ranch. She painted what she always painted when she needed to find herself again, light. The way it came through a window in a small room. The way it moved across a plain surface and made something ordinary into something worth looking at. She painted until the lamp burned low. When she finally stopped, she looked at what she had made, and it was the best thing she had produced since she'd arrived in Shelbyville. Not perfect, but alive, fully alive in a way that the earlier pieces hadn't been. She cleaned her brushes carefully, one by one. She put them away. She turned down the lamp. And in the dark, before she slept, she thought about what Thomas Reed had said, he's going to come himself, and she thought about Nathaniel sitting alone in the big house with the ledgers he didn't understand and the spring contracts she had written, and the dinner table with 12 empty chairs. And she felt neither triumph nor guilt. She felt something quieter than both. She felt ready. Not yet, and maybe not ever. And she was honest enough with herself to hold both possibilities at once, without flinching from either. Ready for herself. For the next morning, the next canvas. The next account ledger she would open and understand in 10 minutes what the owner had been puzzling over for months. ready for the slow, hard clarifying work of finding out who she was when she wasn't holding someone else's life together. She pulled the blanket up. Outside Shelbyville was quiet. The stars were out. Somewhere in the dark 14 miles west, a man was reading a letter for the 5th time, in a house that had never felt so large or so empty. Beginning slowly, painfully, too late, and maybe just in time to understand the true cost of everything he had failed to see. The first thing that broke was the payroll. Thomas Reed came to Nathaniel on a Tuesday morning, hat in hand, with the careful expression of a man delivering news he'd been dreading. The ranch hands were due their monthly wages. The payroll ledger, the one Evelyn had kept in the bottom drawer of the study desk. Organized by worker, by rate, by hours, by deductions, was nowhere Nathaniel could find it. He had spent 3 hours the previous evening going through every drawer in that study and had come up with nothing except a growing awareness of how many drawers there were and how little he knew about what was in them. She kept a separate ledger for payroll, Thomas said. Green cover, smaller than the main accounts book. I know that now, Nathaniel said. I can't find it. 3rd shelf in the storage room. Behind the winter supply records. Nathaniel looked at him. How do you know that? Thomas looked back at him with the steady, patient expression of a man who had decided to be honest regardless of consequence. Because I watched her organize this ranch for 8 years. Mr. Whitaker. I knew where most things were because she told me. In case something happened, and she needed someone to be able to find them. In case something happened. Nathaniel let that sit. He found the ledger where Thomas said it would be. He opened it and stared at Evelyn's handwriting, that clean, precise hand that the bank had once complimented, and he felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not grief, not yet. Something closer to vertigo. The sensation of a man who has been standing on solid ground and has just looked down and realized the ground was someone else's hands. And those hands have opened. He paid the ranch hands. It took him 4 hours to do what Evelyn had done in 40 minutes. And he made 2 arithmetic errors that Thomas quietly corrected without comment. That evening, alone in the study, Nathaniel sat in the chair behind the desk and looked at the room around him. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has seen 1,000 times but never actually seen. The organized shelves, the labeled drawers, the filing system that had appeared, as far as he had ever considered it, simply as the natural order of things, as if order were something that happened on its own. Like weather. He picked up her letter. He read it again. For the 5th time or the 6th, he had lost count. I have been disappearing for a very long time, Nathaniel. And I find that I am not willing to disappear completely. He set it down. He thought about the dinner, about Patterson's question, about his own voice, easy and warm, saying Margaret's name without a moment's hesitation. Without a single flicker of thought about the woman at the foot of the table who had made every inch of that evening possible. He hadn't thought of Evelyn at all. That was the part he kept returning to. Not that he'd said the wrong name, people misspoke. People forgot. People made mistakes in the moment. But in that moment, with Patterson's question hanging in the air, Nathaniel's mind had reached for an answer and had not reached for his wife. Had not even grazed her. She had not existed in that moment as a possible answer. That was not a mistake. That was 8 years of something. He didn't sleep well that night. He hadn't slept well since she left. By the 2nd week, the household had begun to show first cracks. Bess managed the kitchen, and managed it well, but Bess was a cook, not an administrator. And the dozen small decisions that kept a household running, the decisions about which suppliers to use and which accounts to pay first and order new linens and how to handle the quarterly inventory, had all been Evelyn's. Always silently, without ceremony. The 2 house girls did their best. They were young, conscientious, and entirely lost without direction. Nathaniel tried to give direction. He discovered in the trying that he did not know enough to direct. He did not know which merchant gave the best price on candles. He did not know that the household had a standing agreement with the laundry service in town. He did not know this one stopped him cold when he found out that Evelyn had been managing a small fund for the household repairs, set aside monthly from the household accounts, which was why the roof on the east wing had been quietly fixed last spring, without anyone needing to bring it to his attention. She had handled a leaking roof without telling him, because she had known he was busy with the spring contracts. Because she had learned, over 8 years, that managing his life meant also managing his attention, protecting it from the small things, so he could focus on the large ones. And he had received that protection so completely, and for so long that he had mistaken it for the absence of small things. He sat down on the back porch one evening, which was not something he did, and he put his hands on his knees, and he stared at nothing, and he thought, what did I think she was doing all day? He genuinely could not reconstruct an answer. He had known, in the vague way, that a man knows things he has never examined, that Evelyn kept the house and managed the accounts and handled the correspondence. He had known it the way he knew the sun came up in the east. It was simply true, simply there, requiring no further consideration. He considered it now. It required a great deal of consideration. Gerald Holt came by on the Thursday of the second week, ostensibly to discuss the spring contracts. Actually, Nathaniel understood this immediately, to see what was happening. Gerald was a good businessman and a mediocre friend. The kind of man who kept his ear to the ground and called it loyalty. They sat in the study. Nathaniel poured the wrong whiskey. He realized after, the one Evelyn had kept for the ranch hands. Not for guests, and Gerald got to it quickly, because Gerald always did. People are starting to wonder, Gerald said, about Evelyn. The visiting a sick relative story is wearing thin. I know, Nathaniel said. Is she coming? Bow was quiet. Nat. Gerald leaned forward. If this gets out, if it becomes known that your wife has left, it will affect the business. The Caldwells, Abernathy, the Louisville merchants. These are men who value stability. A man who can't keep his household together, Gerald. Nathaniel said it quietly. Gerald stopped. I'm going to ask you to leave that part of it alone. I'm trying to help you think practically. I know what you're trying to do. Nathaniel looked at him levelly. And I'm telling you that my wife is not a business problem. So let's talk about the spring contracts, or let's call it a night. Gerald stared at him for a moment. Something shifted in his expression, not respect exactly, but the recalibration of a man reassessing what he's dealing with. All right, Gerald said. The contracts. They talked about the contracts. But after Gerald left, Nathaniel sat alone in the study with the wrong whiskey and thought about what he'd just said. My wife is not a business problem, and felt the particular shame of a man who understands. Too late, that he has been treating her like one. He wrote her a second letter on a Saturday night. He sat at the desk for a long time before he wrote it. He thought about what he wanted to say, and he thought about whether he had the right to say it. And he decided that the right and the wanting were separate questions, and he would deal with one at a time. He wrote Evelyn, I found the payroll ledger. Thomas told me where it was. I paid the men. It took me most of the morning, which I mentioned not to complain but to give you a precise account of what I have only recently understood. He wrote, I have been trying to reconstruct what you did. Every day, for 8 years. I cannot do it. I can identify the categories, the accounts, the household, the correspondence, the suppliers, the social obligations. The things you managed so that I never had to know they needed managing. I can identify them. I cannot do them with anything close to the competence you brought to all of them simultaneously. And I have been doing this for 2 weeks. He wrote. Gerald came by. He suggested your absence was a business problem. I told him it wasn't. I want you to know I meant that not as something I felt I should say, but as something I believed when I said it. I'm telling you, because I think you deserve to know. He stopped. Reread what he'd written, added. I have been thinking about what kind of man builds a life next to a person for 8 years and does not see them. I don't have a clean answer. I have the beginning of one. And the beginning is not comfortable. I think that's as honest as I can be right now. He sent it with Thomas the following Monday. Thomas returned from Shelbyville with a reply that he delivered without reading. Tus was that kind of man, and Nathaniel opened it alone in the study that evening. She had written, Nathaniel, thank you for writing again. She had written, I'm not going to pretend the payroll took you all morning. Didn't make me feel something complicated. It did, not triumph, I want to be clear about that. Something closer to the grief of watching someone finally look at a thing that needed looking at 8 years ago. She had written, I am working. I have accounts clients in Shelby businesses whose books I've reorganized in the past month. I am also painting again, the first finished piece in nearly a year. I tell you this not to make you feel worse, but because you asked how I am. And that is honestly how I am, working and painting. And beginning slowly to remember what it feels like to be a complete person. She had written, you asked what kind of man builds a life next to someone for 8 years without seeing them. I've thought about that question too, and I think the honest answer is a man who was never asked to look. I stopped asking you to look at me a long time ago. I stopped because it hurt less to stop asking than to keep asking and be overlooked. That's not entirely your fault, but it is partly mine. And I've been sitting with that, she had written at the end. I don't know what comes next, Nathaniel. I'm not ready to know yet. What I know is that I am not the same woman who left that dinner table. And I cannot go back to being her. Whatever comes next has to start from where I actually am. Nathaniel read the letter twice. He folded it carefully. He put it in the drawer with the first one. He sat for a long time. Then, he said, to the empty room, quietly, the way a man speaks when he's finally being honest with himself. I have to go see her. He did not go immediately. He spent another week on the ranch, finishing things that needed finishing. But also, and he was honest enough with himself to admit this working up to it. Because going to Shelbyville meant standing in front of Evelyn without a ledger to point to, without a business matter to raise, without anything practical to hide behind. It meant standing in front of her as himself, only himself, which was something he had not done in a very long time and was not at all sure he knew how to do. He arrived in Shelbyville on a Wednesday morning. He found the boarding house on the 2nd Street he tried. The woman who answered the door, stout, sharp-eyed, with the look of someone who had seen every variety of man who came looking for a woman in a boarding house and had opinions about all of them, looked him over with frank assessment. Mrs. Whitaker, he said. I'm her husband. I know who you are, Mrs. Pruitt said. She described you well enough. She did not say whether the description had been flattering. Her expression suggested it had been accurate. Wait here. She left him on the doorstep. He waited. He heard footsteps on the stairs inside 2 sets. Mrs. Pruitt's heavier tread and then a lighter set. Steadier. He had always been able to identify Evelyn by the way she walked. Unhurried. Deliberate. The walk of a woman who knew where she was going. The door opened. She looked at him. He had prepared for this. He had thought about what he would say, had turned it over for days. And standing there, with Evelyn in the doorway of a boarding house in Shelbyville, with paint on her left hand and the clear, steady eyes of a woman who had nothing left to pretend. Every prepared word left him completely. She looked different. Not in the way of suffering. She didn't look like a woman who had been through something hard. She looked like a woman who had been through something necessary. There was a quality to her face that he didn't have a word for. Something that had not been there in the 8 years he had known her. Something that looked like he searched for it like a rival. Like she had gotten somewhere she'd been trying to get for a long time. Nathaniel, she said, Evelyn. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "May I come in?" She considered him for a moment. Not unkindly, but not quickly either. She was not going to make this easy for him. And he understood that was not cruelty, it was honesty. He had not earned easy. "Yes," she said. "Come in, Mrs." Pruitt produced tea with the efficiency of a woman who had decided that whatever was about to happen required some kind of structure around it, and then removed herself with a discretion that Nathaniel appreciated more than he could say. They sat across from each other at the small table. The room was so different from anything in the Whitaker house, so small, so plain, with the painting on the wall and the brushes on the windowsill and the ledger papers stacked neatly at the corner of the table, and yet it had a quality he recognized. Order, the deep, considered order of a woman who knew what she was doing and why. She had built this in a month, from nothing. He looked at the painting on the wall. A window, and light, and something about the light that made the air feel real. "You painted that," he said. He stopped. He did not have the vocabulary for paintings, had never needed it, had never thought to develop it. "It's very good, Evelyn. Thank you." Silence. She was not going to fill it for him. That was new. Or rather, he was beginning to understand it was very old. It was the version of her that had existed before she learned that filling silences was her job. "I should have come sooner," he said. "You're here now. That's generous of you." "It's accurate," she said. "I try not to confuse the two." He looked at her. There was something in her voice that was different from anything he had heard from her before, not harder. Not colder, but more present, like a woman who had stopped standing slightly to the side of herself. "I've been trying to understand," he said, "what I did. What I didn't do. It's been a hard month, Evelyn, and I don't say that for sympathy. I say it because I think you're owed an honest account of what it has looked like from inside it. Tell me." "Then," she said. So he told her. He told her about the payroll ledger and the hours it had taken. He told her about the household accounts and the repair fund and the roof he hadn't known about. He told her about Gerald Holt and what he'd said to him. He told her about sitting on the back porch one evening and asking himself what he had thought she was doing all day and being unable to answer. He told her about the letters, that he had read hers many times, that the line about disappearing had stayed with him in a way that few things had ever stayed with him. She listened all the way through. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Nathaniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly." Not kindly, honestly. "All right, when Patterson asked his question at the dinner, why did you say Margaret's name?" He had known this question was coming. He had been preparing for it for weeks, and standing here, with Evelyn's eyes on him, clear and steady, and requiring nothing from him except truth, he understood that all of his preparation was beside the point because the answer was simple and he had known it all along. "Because," he said slowly, "when I thought about who ran my house, I didn't think of you." She didn't flinch. She had expected the answer. But he kept going, because she deserved the whole of it. "Not because I didn't value it. I did value it. I valued it the way I valued the house standing and the fire burning and the food on the table. As a condition of life, not as something a person was doing. Not as something that cost anything." He stopped. "I didn't think of you because I had never thought of you in those terms. You were my wife. The house was kept. Those were not two separate facts to me. They were one fact, and I never looked past the fact to find you in it." Evelyn was very still. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 8 years," she said. "I know," he said. "It's also the saddest," she said. "I know that too." She walked to the window. She stood with her back to him for a moment, and he waited, because this was not a moment that could be hurried or managed. And he was beginning slowly, imperfectly, to understand the difference between those things. She turned around. "I went to an exhibition last week," she said. In Louisville. A small gallery, nothing grand. A woman from Cincinnati showed her paintings landscapes. Mostly, but one series of portraits that stopped me completely. I stood in front of one of them for nearly 20 minutes. She looked at him steadily. I thought, I could do this. Not someday. Now. I have the skill. I have the vision. The only thing I didn't have, for 8 years, was the time and the space to do it. And I didn't have those things, because I had given them to you. He said nothing. I'm not saying that to wound you, she said. I'm saying it because it is precisely true, and we are past the point where I soften things for the sake of your comfort. I know, he said. Good. She sat back down. Then you understand that I cannot go back. Not to what it was. I'm not asking you to, he said. I don't want you to. She looked at him sharply. That had surprised her. He could see it. I've been sitting in that house for a month, he said. Trying to run something I don't know how to run and feeling. Every single day, the space where you should be. Not where a housekeeper should be. Not where a woman who keeps accounts should be. Where you should be, all of you. Your painting and your mind and your opinions and the way you read a room before anyone in it has figured out what's happening. He stopped. Steadied himself. I don't want the woman who stood at the foot of that table and said nothing. I want the woman who just told me that we are past the point of softening things for my comfort. Evelyn looked at him for a long time. That woman, she said carefully, didn't exist when I lived in your house. I know, he said. I'm asking if she might come back. Not to the old arrangement. To something different. Something we would have to build from where we actually are. Which is, I'll be honest, Evelyn, far behind where we should be. And I know that is my fault more than yours. The room was very quiet. Outside, Shelbyville went about its business, indifferent and unhurried. And in Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house, 2 people who had lived next to each other for 8 years were having, for the first time, a real conversation. Evelyn looked at her hands. At the paint on her left hand. She looked at the painting on the wall, her painting. I'm not ready, she said. Not yet. And I need you to understand that not yet is not a door closing. It is the honest position of a woman who has just, in the last month, started to remember who she is. I cannot make a decision about what we are or what we become until I know that person more completely. She's been away for 8 years. She needs more than a month. Nathaniel nodded. How long? I don't know, she said. That's the honest answer. I don't know, and I can't give you a date, and if you need a date to keep hoping, then I think you have to find a way to hope without one. He sat with that. He let it be what it was without trying to change its shape. All right, he said. Then I'll wait. And while I wait, I'll be learning how to run what you built, how to see what you saw, how to be a different kind of man than the one you left. He paused. I'm not saying that to win you back. I'm saying it because I think I owe it to you regardless of what you decide. And because I think I owe it to myself. Evelyn looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. Something in her expression shifted, something small. Something that was not a door opening but was perhaps a window. Slightly, letting in a thread of air. You'd better have another cup of tea, she said. And tell me what's actually happening with the spring contracts. Because I'd wager, Patterson has given you a shorter deadline than you've told anyone. And if that's the case, you need to renegotiate before the end of the month. Nathaniel stared at her. Then, despite everything, despite the month of not sleeping and the ledgers he couldn't find, and the weight of everything he was only now beginning to understand, he laughed. A real laugh startled out of him. Patterson gave me until the 28th, he said. You have 10 days, she said. Here's what you need to do. And just like that, with the tea going cold between them and the afternoon light, moving across the plain floor of a room in a boarding house in Shelbyville, Evelyn Harper Whitaker did what she had always done. She took a complicated problem and made it clear. And the man across from her leaned forward and actually, finally listened, not because he needed her answer, but because he had finally understood that the mind giving it was worth paying attention to. And that understanding it, even now, even this late, was the only true beginning either of them had. The 28th came and went. Patterson signed. The contract was better than the original terms, because Evelyn had seen an opportunity in the renegotiation that Nathaniel had missed, and she had told him about it in the plain, direct language of a woman who was done performing modesty she didn't feel. She sent him back to Kentucky with the contract terms in hand and a clarity between them that was not reconciliation, not yet. Maybe not for a long time, but was something real. Something built on ground that was finally, for the first time in 8 years, solid. Thomas Reed was waiting when Nathaniel rode back into the ranch late that evening. He took the horse without being asked and looked at Nathaniel's face with those careful eyes that saw everything. "Well," he said. "She's not coming back," Nathaniel said. "Not yet. But she's not gone," Nathaniel said. Thomas nodded again. He began to lead the horse toward the stable. Then stopped. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, without turning around. "For what it's worth, she's painting again." Nathaniel stood in the dark for a moment. "I know," he said. He went inside. The house was quiet around him, too large, too still, carrying in every room the organized absence of a woman who had run all of it with one hand and painted with the other and had never once been asked which she preferred. He went to the study. He opened the grain ledger. He sat down and got to work. And for the first time since she had walked out the front door while he slept, the work did not feel like something being done in place of something. It felt like the beginning of a debt being paid, not in full. Not close to full, but begun, which was more than it had been. And which he was only beginning to understand this was the only way any real thing ever started. Winter came to Shelbyville the way it always did, without apology and without ceremony, and Evelyn moved through it with the steady rhythm she had built for herself over the past 2 months, which was the closest thing to peace she had felt in years. She woke early. She made her own coffee, which was a small thing that mattered more than it should have, the act of making it herself. For herself, time to her own morning and nobody else's. She worked the accounts from 7 until noon, 3 days a week, visiting her clients in the order she had organized them by neighborhood, so she wasted no time on the road. She painted in the afternoons, when the light was best in her room, and she had learned by now exactly which hour the light hit the window at the angle she wanted. And she structured her whole afternoon around it, without explaining herself to anyone. She had stopped explaining herself to anyone. That, too, was a small thing that mattered enormously. Nathaniel wrote every 2 weeks. He had settled into a correspondence rhythm that she had not asked for, but had come to, she was honest with herself about this, quietly appreciate. Not because the letters made her soften toward the decision she'd made, but because they were the most honest communication they had ever had, which was a particular kind of grief and a particular kind of hope mixed together in a proportion she couldn't yet name. His letters had changed. The first ones had been about the ranch, practical, almost apologetic in their practicality, as if he were reporting to her on the state of something she still owned. But by November they had become something else. He wrote about what he was learning. Not about accounts or contracts, but about himself, which was the kind of writing she had never expected from him and didn't quite know what to do with. He wrote, "I had a conversation with Bess yesterday that I think you would have found instructive, and I should have had years ago. She told me, without being unkind about it, that you had been making most of the household decisions since your 2nd year here. That you had stopped bringing them to me because I consistently responded to them as interruptions. I did not know that about myself. I have been thinking about what else I don't know about myself, and the list is longer than I am comfortable with." She read that letter twice. Then she put it in the drawer with the others and went back to work. Because working was the thing that kept her honest with herself. and honesty with herself was the only currency she trusted right now. The gallery came about the way most good things came about in her life, through competence, applied quietly until someone noticed. She had been doing Douglas Mercer's accounts for 2 months when he mentioned, one Thursday morning, that his cousin in Louisville ran a small commercial gallery and was looking for regional artists for a winter exhibition. He said it the way people say things they're not sure will land, carefully, with the door left open for her to decline without awkwardness. "What kind of work does he show?" Evelyn asked. "Landscapes. Mostly. Some portraiture. He likes what he calls honest work, doesn't go for the fancy Eastern stuff. Wants things that look like they come from somewhere real." How many pieces would he need to see? Mercer blinked. He had clearly expected more preamble. 3 or 4, he said. "I'll have them ready by Friday," she said. She had 7 finished pieces by then. She chose 4: the window light painting, a field study she'd done in November when the frost was new, a small portrait of Mrs. Pruitt that she'd started without telling her and that had come out truer than she'd expected, and the piece she'd finished just the previous week, the one that had cost her the most, the one she'd painted and scraped back twice before she got it right. A woman at a long table, seen from the far end, candles going cold around her, her hands still in her lap and her face turned toward a flame. No title yet. She hadn't found the right words. She wrapped all 4 pieces in cloth and sent them to Louisville with Mercer on Friday morning. She did not tell anyone she'd done it. Not Clara, not Mrs. Pruitt, not Thomas Reed when he came through town the following week with a message from Nathaniel. She had learned something important about herself in the past 2 months. She worked better when she wasn't performing her own ambition for an audience. The doing was the thing. The outcome could arrive or not. It arrived. Mercer's cousin, a lean, precise man named Arthur Finch, who communicated in short sentences, meant every word of them sent a reply within 10 days. He wanted all 4 pieces for the winter exhibition. He named a price for each of them that made her set the letter down, pick it up again, and reread it twice to confirm she hadn't misread the numbers. She hadn't. She sat at the table for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not the polite, contained laugh she had learned to produce at dinner parties. The real kind. The kind Clara had heard from her in November and had said, with visible relief, sounded like the girl from Richmond. She laughed until her eyes watered, sitting alone in her room in Mrs. Pruitt's boarding house, with paint on her hands, and 4 paintings about to hang in a Louisville gallery. And she felt something she recognized after a moment as pride. Clean, straightforward pride, owing nothing to anyone and everything to herself. She wrote to Clara that evening. She told her everything. Clara's reply came back in 4 days and consisted of 1 line. "I told you the light was right," she told Nathaniel in her next letter. She told him plainly, the way she told him most things now, without softening it, without managing his response in advance, without doing the emotional preparation for him that she had always done and that had cost her so much for so long. She wrote, "I have 4 paintings in an exhibition in Louisville. They will hang in January. I am telling you because it is a true and real thing that has happened to me. And I have decided I am done editing my life before I share it with you." His reply came back faster than usual. He wrote, "Evelyn, that is, I don't have the right words. I know I don't have the right words for things like this, which is itself something I'm trying to fix. What I can say is that I am glad. Not glad for myself or for what it might mean for us. Glad for you, specifically, which is a sentence I am ashamed I didn't learn to say sooner." She read it standing at the window. The winter light was pale and thin and very clear. The kind of light that showed everything exactly as it was. It was a near thing. The exhibition opening was in January. And Clara came down from Richmond for it, which meant a 3-day journey in January. Which meant Clara considered it important enough to be uncomfortable for. which was the kind of friendship Evelyn had spent most of her life not fully understanding she deserved. They stood together in Finch's gallery on the opening evening, and Evelyn watched strangers look at her work with the focused attention that people bring to things that matter to them. And she felt she searched for the right word and found it visible. Genuinely, fully visible in a way that had nothing to do with being needed and everything to do with being seen. A woman in her 50s stopped in front of the table painting. The woman at the long table with her hands in her lap and the cold candles and the face turned toward the flame. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned to her companion, a man her age, her husband perhaps, and said something quiet that Evelyn couldn't hear. The man looked at the painting. He nodded slowly. Evelyn looked away. Clara touched her arm. "You need to title that one," she said quietly. "I know. What's it called?" Evelyn looked at it from across the room. The woman at the table, the cold candles, the hands, the face, the absolute stillness of a woman in the moment before she decides. "The last evening," she said. Clara was quiet for a moment. "That's right," she said. "That's exactly right. All 4 paintings sold by the end of the evening." Arthur Finch found her near the door as people were leaving, and said, in his short sentence way, "I'll want more. Spring exhibition. If you're willing. 6 terms." He paused. The table painting went to a woman from Lexington. She cried when she bought it. "I thought you should know." Evelyn looked at him. Why did she cry? She said it looked like someone had painted a feeling she'd never been able to name, he said. I told her that was the job. Evelyn thought about that on the carriage ride back to Shelbyville. She thought about a woman in Lexington crying in front of a painting of a feeling that had no name. And she thought about all the other women who might have that feeling. And she thought about what it meant to make something that found people in the places they'd stopped looking for company. She had been making things her whole life. This was the first time she understood what the making was actually for. Thomas Reed came to Shelbyville in February. And this time it was not with a letter. He came himself, which was different, and he came with his hat in his hands, and an expression she had not seen on him before, something careful, and waited. The expression of a man carrying news he's not sure how to set down. She knew immediately that something had happened. "What is it?" she said. The moment Mrs. Pruitt showed him upstairs, he sat down. He turned his hat twice. Then he said Mr. Whitaker had a fall. 3 weeks ago. He's all right, I want to say that first. He's all right. But it was bad enough that the doctor kept him in bed for 2 weeks. And he didn't want me to tell you while it was happening, because he said, Thomas stopped. He said he didn't want you to come back for the wrong reason. Evelyn went very still. "What kind of fall?" she said. "The east stable roof. He was up there himself fixing it. The repair fund had run low and he'd decided to do it himself rather than spend money he wasn't sure about." Thomas looked at her directly. He didn't know there was a repair fund system set aside for exactly that kind of job. He'd been managing the accounts differently, and the fund hadn't been replenished the way you'd always done it quietly. She closed her eyes for a moment. "Is he truly all right? Broken arm too, cracked? A cut on his head that needs stitching. He's up and moving now. Arm in a sling for another month. Why are you telling me now if he asked you not to?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. "Because," he said, "I have worked for that family for 11 years. And I watched you hold it together for 8 of them. And I think you have the right to know what's happening, regardless of what he said." And because he stopped again more carefully this time, because there's something else. "Tell me. The ranch isn't failing," he said quickly. "I don't want you to think that. But it's struggling in ways that the spring contracts are solid. The grain situation is manageable, but Nathaniel has been making decisions without the information he needs because he still doesn't fully understand the systems you built. He's been guessing at things he should know, and some of the guesses have been costly." Evelyn looked at her hands. "How costly?" Thomas named a figure. It wasn't ruinous. But it wasn't small. She thought about the ranch not with guilt, not with the reflexive pull of a woman who had been trained to feel responsible for everything. She thought about it practically, the way she thought about Mercer's accounts or Gil's missing money. She thought about the grain contracts she had renegotiated and the systems she had built, and the 8 years of careful management that had built something solid. And she thought about what it would mean to watch it degrade not out of malice, but out of a man not knowing what he didn't know. He needs a proper estate manager, she said. Someone who understands ledger systems and can be trained on the specific. He fired the last one, Thomas said. 3 weeks before the fall, the man he hired was cutting corners on the supply accounts. She stared at him. He found that himself he did. Something moved in Thomas's expression. He's been learning, Mrs. Whitaker. Slowly, and he makes mistakes. And the fall set him back, but he's been trying. He paused. I think you should see him, Thomas. Not to go back, he said. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you should see him. Because there's a difference between the man who said Margaret's name at that dinner and the man lying in the bedroom with a broken arm who told me not to worry you with it. And I think you deserve to see that difference with your own eyes before you make any final decisions. She sat with that for a long time. When did he fall, she asked. First week of February. She did the arithmetic. He had lain there for 3 weeks, broken and mending, and had instructed Thomas not to tell her, had not used his injury as a claim on her sympathy, had not leveraged his pain to pull her back, had simply been hurt and healed and kept going, and said nothing to her, because he had decided that her freedom mattered more than his need for her to know. She thought about that. She thought about the letter he'd sent. The week after the fall, that had talked about a conversation with Bess and about the list of things he didn't know about himself. He had written that letter with a broken arm. He had not mentioned the arm. She stood up. I'll go on Friday, she said. Thomas nodded. He stood, he held his hat. One more thing, he said. He's been reading, in the evenings while he was laid up. Books about estate management, land law, accounting practices. Thomas paused. And one other thing. He asked me about 2 weeks ago. Where you kept your painting materials. Before you left. She frowned. Why? He found your studio room. He cleaned it out himself, the ledgers and the extra linens that had gotten stored in there over the years. Cleared everything out. Had it properly swept and the window repaired. It had a broken latch. Evelyn stopped breathing for a moment. He didn't say anything about it, Thomas said, to anyone. I only know because I saw him carrying boxes out myself. I asked what he was doing. He said he was fixing something that should have been fixed a long time ago. She stood at the window. She looked out at Shelbyville, at the plain, ordinary street, at the life she had built in this town from $4 a month and 6 brushes and enough courage to begin. She pressed her lips together. Friday, she said. She arrived at the Whitaker Ranch on a Friday afternoon. And the strangeness of it, the familiar drive, the familiar gate, the way the light fell across the yard at this hour that she had seen 1,000 times hit her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Not sentiment, or not only sentiment, something more complex. The feeling of a woman looking at a place that had been her life and understanding. For the first time from the outside, both what it had cost her and what she had genuinely built there. Both things at once, with no softening of either. Thomas had stayed discreetly out of sight. Bess met her at the door with the expression of a woman who had many things she wanted to say and had decided that now was not the moment for any of them. He's in the study, Bess said. Evelyn walked in. The house felt different. She could not immediately name why, and then she could. It was less perfect. The kind of imperfection that comes not from neglect but from a house being lived in by one person who is learning to live in it for the first time. It was less curated, more inhabited. She wasn't sure if that was better or worse or simply different. She knocked on the study door. Come in, Nathaniel said. She opened the door. He was at her desk. The desk she had sat at 1,000 mornings, with papers in front of him, and his right arm in a cloth sling, and his face carrying 2 months of something that sat heavier than tiredness. He looked up. For a moment neither of them said anything. He looked worse than she'd expected, and better than she'd feared. The cut on his head had healed to a thin scar at the hairline. He was thinner. He looked like a man who had been through something and had not yet fully come out the other side of it, but who was still moving forward anyway, which was not nothing. "You didn't have to come," he said. "Thomas told me." "I told him not to," she said. "Thomas has his own judgment about what's right. I've always respected that about him." Something moved in Nathaniel's expression. "So have I," he said, more now than before. She sat down in the chair across from the desk. The same chair she had sat in 2 months before the dinner, when she had laid out the plan and he had nodded once and gone back to his papers. "Show me the accounts," she said. He hesitated. "Evelyn, not because I'm taking them back," she said clearly. "Because I want to see where you are. You can't know how far you've come if no one looks at where you started." He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the ledger. She went through it carefully, page by page, and he watched her face and she let him watch because she wasn't hiding anything anymore and hadn't been for 2 months. The accounts were imperfect, earnest and imperfect, the way the work of a capable man learning something genuinely new tends to be. Some of the categorization was wrong. 2 of the monthly reconciliations were off by amounts that were small now but would compound. The payroll was clean. He had mastered that she could see, in a way that had clearly cost him real effort. The grain contracts were solid, exactly as she had structured them. "The categorization in column 3, she said. "You've been putting the stable supply costs under general operations. They need their own line." "I didn't know that." "I know. I'll write it out for you, the full notation system. Explained from the beginning. Not because you need me to keep the accounts. Because you need to understand the architecture of them well enough to manage whoever you hire to help." He was quiet. "You think I should hire someone?" "I think you should have hired someone 8 years ago," she said. "Not instead of me. In addition to me. So that I wasn't the only person who knew how any of it worked." He looked at the ledger. "That's a fair point. It's a true point," she said. "Fair isn't the word I'm reaching for anymore." He looked up at her. Something in his face changed a recognition, or a deepening of one. "What word are you reaching for?" he said. "Accurate," she said. "I'm reaching for accurate," he nodded slowly. "That suits you," he said. "It always didn't." "No to notice," she said. "Yes. We've established that." There was something in her voice that was not quite warmth, but was in the same neighborhood, something that allowed the sentence to land without cruelty, which was a kind of grace she was choosing deliberately. Not out of habit. He closed the ledger. He looked at her directly. "I had your studio room cleared," he said. "Thomas told me. I should have done it years ago. I should have kept it yours from the beginning. I didn't. I allowed it to become a storage room the way I allowed a lot of things to happen, by not paying attention to what was being lost in the process." He stopped. "The window latch is fixed. The room is clean. It's yours. Whether you stopped again, whatever you decide. The room is yours." Evelyn looked at him. She thought about the studio, about the half-finished field she had propped against the wall in there, the night everything changed. About the 11 months of not painting, and the month in Shelbyville when the stiffness had broken open and the work had come back. Better than before, truer than before. She thought about the woman who had cried in Louisville over a painting of a feeling that had no name. She thought about what it would mean to paint in that room again. Not as the woman who had hidden her work in margins and evenings and stolen hours. As the woman who had shown in a Louisville gallery and sold all 4 pieces and had an offer for 6 more. As the woman who knew the worth of what she made and did not require anyone else to confirm it. "I have a showing in Louisville in the spring," she said. 6 pieces. I'll need space and light and time that is entirely mine. Not occasional time. Not borrowed time, structured. Regular, non-negotiable time. You'll have it, he said. I'll need more than that, she said. I'll need a different kind of partnership than what we had. One where I don't manage your life silently while my own disappears. If I come back, she paused on the word, holding it exactly as heavy as it was. If. I need you to understand that I am not coming back to what we were. I would be coming back to build something we have never tried before. Something that would require both of us to do things differently than we know how to do them. I know, he said. Do you, she said, not unkindly, genuinely. He was quiet for a long moment. The kind of quiet that means a man is not forming a response but actually thinking. Which was different, and she had learned to know the difference. No, he said finally. I don't know yet. I know I want to try. I know I understand, better than I did, what trying would actually require. Whether I know how to do it, he shook his head. I think the honest answer is that I don't know yet. And I'd rather tell you that than tell you I do and have you find out otherwise. Evelyn looked at him. This was the most honest he had ever been with her. Not the most romantic, not the most tender. Honest. Clear. Willing to sit with his own uncertainty instead of papering over it with confidence he didn't have. It was the most attractive she had found him in years. She did not say that. She filed it away in the careful drawer where she kept the things she was not yet ready to act on. I'm going back to Shelbyville tonight, she said. I have accounts on Monday and a canvas I'm in the middle of. She stood. But I'll write out the notation system for the ledger before I go. And I'll come back in 3 weeks, not to stay, just to see how the accounts are moving. He stood too, which took him a moment with the sling, and she noticed he didn't ask for help and she didn't offer it. Which was its own kind of respect. Evelyn, he said. She stopped at the door. Thank you, he said, for coming. For looking at the ledger. For he stopped. For all of it. The accurate version of it, not the softened one. She looked at him over her shoulder. Thank you for clearing the studio, she said. She went downstairs. She sat at the kitchen table with Bess's good paper and wrote out the notation system from the beginning. Clear and complete, the way she wrote everything, leaving nothing to interpretation. Nothing that required her presence to understand. Then she folded it and left it on the study desk. She said goodbye to Bess, who pressed her hand and said nothing. Which was the right thing. She found Thomas at the gate. Well, he said. He's further along than I expected, she said. Thomas nodded. And you? She thought about the studio room. About the clean floor, and the fixed latch, and the window that had always had the best morning light in the house. About the spring exhibition and the 6 pieces she hadn't painted yet, and the woman in Lexington crying over a feeling that finally had a name. Further along than I expected, she said. She got in the carriage. She rode back toward Shelbyville as the sun went down over Kentucky. And she thought about all the things that had no clean resolution yet, and held them without trying to force them into shape. Because she had learned, in 2 months of small plain mornings, and honest work, and paint-stained hands, that the things worth having were the ones you let become what they actually were. Slowly and without managing them, in their own time. The road was dark by the time she reached town. Mrs. Pruitt had left a lamp in the window. Evelyn went upstairs, hung up her coat, and stood in front of the unfinished canvas on the easel for a long moment. Then she picked up her brush. The 6 paintings for Arthur Finch's spring exhibition took her 11 weeks. Not because she was slow, because she was honest, which was harder and took longer, and produced something entirely different from speed. She scraped back 2 canvases completely once in February, when she realized she was painting what she thought a painting should look like, instead of what she actually saw. And once in early March when she finished a piece. Stepped back, and understood the space of one clear-eyed minute that it was competent and empty and she would not put her name on it. Mrs. Pruitt knocked on her door the second time she heard the scraping sound. "Another one," she said. "Another one," Evelyn said. Mrs. Pruitt looked at the canvas, at the paint being worked back into nothing, at Evelyn's face, which was not frustrated but focused. The expression of a woman who knows the difference between what she's made and what she meant to make and refuses to pretend they're the same thing. "You know," Mrs. Pruitt said, "most people would just finish it and call it done." "I know," Evelyn said. "Is that why they're not the ones showing in Louisville?" Evelyn looked at her. Mrs. Pruitt allowed herself a small, satisfied expression and went back downstairs. The 6 paintings that finally made it to Arthur Finch were the truest work she had ever done. She knew it the way you know things that don't require an outside opinion in the body. In the chest, in the particular quality of stillness that settles over you when you have made something that is exactly what it needed to be. 2 were landscapes, the Kentucky morning light she had been chasing since she was 22. Finally caught. 1 was a portrait of Clara painted from memory. That captured something about her friend's face that Evelyn wasn't sure she could have named out loud, but that was unmistakably, completely Clara. 1 was a small piece, almost intimate in its scale, of 2 hands on a table, a woman's hands, paint-stained, resting open, not pleading, just resting, open, as if whatever they had been holding had finally been set down. The 5th was the window painting from her first month in Shelbyville. The one she had always known was good, the foundational piece. The one that had said, "There you are," when she finished it. The 6th was new. She had started it the week after she visited the ranch in February. She had not planned it. It had arrived the way the best things arrived, not through effort, but through accumulated honesty. Through 2 months of painting truth, until truth became the only language she had left. It was a woman standing in a doorway, not leaving, not arriving, standing in the threshold looking outward, with the particular quality of a person who is not waiting for permission and is not afraid of what's on the other side. Just standing free in the exact moment of choosing. She titled it Found. Arthur Finch saw the 6 pieces on a Thursday in late March, brought to his gallery by Thomas Reed, who had offered to make the Louisville trip and whom Evelyn had accepted because she was learning, slowly, that accepting help gracefully was its own kind of strength. Finch's reply came 4 days later. He wrote in his short sentence way, "These are the best things you've made. The threshold painting will be the centerpiece. Opening is April 14th. You should be there." She wrote back, "I'll be there," she told Nathaniel in her next letter. She told him the date. She told him the name of the gallery and the address. She told him about the 6 paintings briefly, and she told him what the threshold painting was called and why. She did not invite him. She did not uninvite him either. She wrote the facts and let him decide what to do with them, which was the same thing she had done with her own life for the past 4 months, and which had turned out to be the right approach. He wrote back within 5 days. He wrote, "I would like to come, if that is acceptable to you, not to make a claim on anything, to see what you've made, to see you in a room that is entirely yours." He paused. She could feel the pause in the structure of the sentence, and then he wrote, "I have been in this house for 4 months, learning what it costs to build something worth having. I would like to see what it looks like when someone does it right." She read that 3 times. Then she wrote back, "Come." Clara arrived in Louisville 2 days before the opening, which meant she arrived before everyone else and got to stand in the gallery with Evelyn while the paintings were being hung, which was exactly what Clara would do and exactly what Evelyn needed without having known she needed it. They stood in front of Found while Finch's assistant adjusted the hanging height. "This one," Clara said. She said it quietly, with the certainty of someone who doesn't need to say more. "I know," Evelyn said. "When did you paint it?" "February. After I went back to the ranch." Clara looked at her sideways. And nothing. And I went back to Shelville and scraped back 2 canvases and painted this. That's not nothing, Clara said. That's everything. The whole story is in this painting. Evelyn. That's the point of the painting. Clara smiled. You've gotten sharp. I've gotten accurate, Evelyn said. It's different. It's better, Clara said. They stood together in front of the threshold woman, and Evelyn thought that the 11-year-old girl who had cried over a set of watercolors, because being seen was that overwhelming. And she thought about the 28-year-old woman who had walked out of a house before dawn with 6 brushes in her coat pocket. And she thought about the woman standing in this gallery right now. And she understood that they were all the same person, that none of them had been lost. Only waiting, only covered over, only needing the space to come back to the surface. He's coming to the opening, she said. Clara didn't say anything for a moment. How do you feel about that? I don't know yet, Evelyn said. I'm going to find out when he gets here. That's the honest answer you've ever given me about him, Clara said. I've been working on it, Evelyn said. The opening was on a Tuesday evening in April, and the gallery was fuller than Evelyn had expected. Which Arthur Finch took as his due, and which Evelyn took as information about what happened when you made true things and put them where people could find them. She wore a green dress. Not the one from Richmond, that one was still in a trunk somewhere. Or perhaps gone entirely, it didn't matter. This was a new one, made by a seamstress in Shelbyville, that Evelyn had commissioned with the money from the winter exhibition. Green, the color of deep water, fitted at the waist, with nothing borrowed about it and nothing apologetic. She had stood in front of the mirror at the hotel that morning and looked at herself and had not looked away. Clara had whistled when she saw her. That, Clara said, is the woman I've been waiting to meet. She's been here the whole time, Evelyn said. I know, Clara said. She just needed the right dress. The gallery filled steadily from 7 o'clock. Finch moved through the room with his short-sentence efficiency, introducing Evelyn to collectors and critics and a woman from a Cincinnati newspaper who wanted to write a piece on regional women artists that Evelyn agreed to speak to with the calm of someone who had stopped finding her own accomplishments surprising. She kept one part of her attention on the door. She was not going to pretend otherwise. She had gotten very good at honesty, and honesty required acknowledging that she was watching for him. That there was a specific quality of alertness in her that had been there since she arrived, and would not fully settle until he either walked through that door or didn't. He walked through at 7:30. He was in his good coat, the dark one she had always thought suited him, and his arm was out of the sling, which was new, though he held it slightly careful. The way you hold something that has recently been broken and is not entirely certain of itself. He looked around the gallery with the expression of a man who does not entirely know where he is, but is paying close attention. And then he found her across the room, and the expression steadied. He didn't move toward her immediately. He looked at the paintings first. She watched him look at them. That mattered more than she had anticipated. She had expected to feel something when he arrived, some complicated mixture of the past and the present colliding. She had not expected to feel what she actually felt, which was a sharp and specific interest in watching a man she had known for 8 years encounter her work for the first time, as if she were a person he was meeting. He moved slowly through the room. He stopped in front of the window, painting her first finished piece, the one that had said, "There you are." He stood there for a long moment. He moved to the morning landscape, to Clara's portrait. He paused at the 2 hands resting open on the table, and she saw something cross his face that he didn't try to manage. He came finally to found. He stood in front of it for longer than he had stood in front of any of the others. She crossed the room. She stood beside him, not in front of him, not behind him, beside. And they looked at the painting together, the woman in the threshold. The light, the quality of a person standing free in the exact moment of choosing. "This is you," he said. It was not a question. "It's a feeling," she said. "But yes, When did you feel this? The morning I left, she said. Standing on the porch before dawn. I didn't have the words for it then. I found them later. He was quiet for a moment. Around them the gallery hummed and moved, and they stood in their own particular stillness inside it. You look like that now, he said. That feeling. You carry it. She looked at him. You do, he said. It's different from how you looked before. You look like someone who knows where she is. I do know where I am, she said. For the first time in a long time. He nodded. He looked back at the painting. I owe you more than an apology, he said. I know that. An apology is what you say when you've made a mistake. What I did. He stopped. What I did was not a mistake. It was 8 years of not choosing to see you, and that is different. And I don't want to give it a smaller name than it deserves. Evelyn looked at the painting. I know, she said. I'm not asking you to forgive it, he said. I'm not sure forgiveness is the right frame. I'm telling you that I understand what it was. And I understand what it cost you, and I am deeply sorry. Evelyn, not for the word I said at the dinner table. For all of it. For every morning I received what you built and did not see the builder. The gallery moved around them. Someone laughed across the room. A glass clinked. Evelyn felt the words settle in her the way honest things settle, not with drama. Not with the sweeping relief of a woman in a story who has been waiting for exactly this. With weight. With reality. With the particular feeling of something long owed finally arriving. Thank you, she said, for saying the whole of it. He looked at her. What happens now? It was the question she had been turning over for 4 months. And she had learned in those 4 months of plain mornings and hard work and painted over canvases that the questions worth asking were rarely the ones with clean answers. But she had also learned that she was not afraid of questions anymore. She had been afraid for a long time of questions she might not be able to manage. She understood now that questions were not problems to manage. They were just the shape of things that were still becoming. I don't know exactly, she said. I know I'm not the woman who left. I know I can't go back to what we were. I know that if we try again, she felt the word in her mouth. Careful and real. If we try again, it has to be built on something true. Not on me folding myself into the shape of your life. Not on my work being secondary to yours. Not on me keeping your house in order while my own life gets stored in a room off the kitchen. I know, he said. I'm not asking for that. What are you asking for? He looked at Found again. At the woman in the threshold. I'm asking, he said slowly. To be allowed to try to deserve standing next to you. Not behind. Next to. On whatever terms that means in practice. I'm asking for the chance to find out. Evelyn was quiet. She thought about the studio room with the fixed latch and the clean floor and the morning light that had always been the best in the house. She thought about the notation system she had written out on Bess's good paper and left on his desk. She thought about a man writing letters with a broken arm and not mentioning the arm. She thought about a long dinner table with cold candles and a woman's hand still in her lap. And she thought about a threshold, and the difference between standing in one afraid and standing in one free. The studio room stays mine, she said. Not borrowed time. Not when I've finished everything else. Mine every morning. Before anything else gets a claim on me. Done, he said. I keep my account clients in Shelbyville. I'm not giving up the work that is mine. I wouldn't ask you to. The spring exhibition Finch wants 6 more pieces by September. That work is my first obligation, not the ranch accounts. Not the household, not the social calendar. My work. First, he said. And if I see you reverting, she stopped. Chose the honest word. If I see you reverting to the man who looked through me instead of at me, I will tell you. No more managing it in silence. No more folding it away to keep things smooth. I will tell you. And you will be expected to hear it. He looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, and it took her a moment to identify it because she had so rarely seen it directed at her from him. It was respect. Clean, genuine, unqualified respect, the kind that doesn't need anything back from you. "I expect you to," he said. "I need you to." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "All right." 2 words. She did not dress them up. She did not add conditions or qualifications or the soft cushioning she had spent 8 years applying to every hard truth. Just all right. Clear and real and meaning exactly what it said. Something in him released. She saw it a physical thing. A quality of held breath finally let go, the way a man looks when he has been braced for a long time and the bracing is no longer necessary. "All right," he said back. Quietly, like an echo that meant something different from the original. Clara appeared at Evelyn's elbow with the timing of a woman who had been watching from the right distance and had decided this was exactly the moment to arrive. "Mr. Whitaker," she said pleasantly, extending her hand. "I'm Clara Bennett. I've been Evelyn's closest friend for 20 years, and I have strong opinions about everything." Which I'm sure she's mentioned. Nathaniel shook her hand. "She mentioned the strong opinions. Good. Then we're starting honestly." Clara looked at the painting. "At Found. She painted that the week after she visited you in February." "I thought you should know." Nathaniel looked at the painting again. "I know," he said. "I can see it." Clara looked at Evelyn with an expression that said, "This one might be worth the trouble after all." Evelyn returned the look with one that said, "Don't push it." Clara smiled serenely and drifted back into the gallery crowd. Found sold that evening to a woman from Lexington, the same woman. Arthur Finch told Evelyn afterward, who had bought the last evening at the winter exhibition. Finch said she had stood in front of Found for 20 minutes, and then said simply, "She finished the story. I need to have both of them." Evelyn heard that and felt something move through her that she didn't try to name. Just felt it, let it move, let it settle. All 6 pieces sold before the evening was out. Finch found her near the end of the night with the look of a man who has seen something confirm a theory he'd been sitting on. "September," he said. 6 more. And I want to talk to you about a full show in December, your own exhibition." "Not a group show. Your work only." She looked at him. "A full show. 12 to 15 pieces. We'd need to start planning now." In the short sentence way. "You're ready for it. The question is whether you know that yet." She thought about the woman she had been a year ago. Standing in front of a hallway mirror in a dress she'd let out at the seams. Trying to be seen at a dinner she had built from the ground up. For a man who would say the wrong name and not notice her face when he said it. She thought about the woman standing in this gallery right now, with paint permanently worked into the creases of her left hand, and a green dress that was no one's compromise. "I know it," she said. "Good," Finch said. "December it is." Nathaniel rode back to Kentucky the next morning. He found Evelyn at breakfast in the hotel before he left, and they ate together for the first time in 5 months. Across a small table, in the plain, honest light of early morning, without the frame of any dinner party around them. And it was ordinary in a way that felt, precisely because of its ordinariness, like something new. She told him about the December show. He listened and asked 3 questions, real questions. Not the questions of a man waiting for his turn to speak, but the questions of a man genuinely trying to understand something he didn't yet know. She answered all 3. He asked what she needed from him between now and whenever she decided to come back to the ranch. "Time," she said, "and for you to keep doing what you've been doing." "Which is?" "Changing," she said. "Not for me. Because it's right. There's a difference." He looked at her. "How do I know if I'm doing it for the right reason?" She thought about that. "If you'd change even knowing I wasn't coming back," she said. "That's the right with that." "Would you?" she said. He didn't answer immediately, which was the right thing to do. He thought about it honestly, the way she had asked him to. The way she had always needed him to. Yes, he said. I think I would. Because the man I was at that dinner table is not a man I want to be. That's separate from you. That's just who I want to be. Then, keep going, she said. He nodded, he stood, he put on his coat. He looked at her across the table. In the morning light, in the green dress, with the paint on her hand that she had stopped trying to scrub out completely because it was part of her now, and she had decided to stop apologizing for the parts of her that were most fully herself. Evelyn, he said. Nathaniel, I'll see you in 3 weeks, he said. For the accounts. You'll see me in 3 weeks, she said. And I expect the categorization in column 3 to be corrected before I get there. Something crossed his face. It started as surprise and moved quickly, warmly, into something that was unmistakably a real smile, not the easy practice smile she had watched him use in 100 rooms. But the other kind, the less controlled kind, the kind that happens to a person instead of being produced by them. It'll be corrected, he said. Good, she said. He left. She sat at the breakfast table alone and drank her coffee, which was very good coffee, and she thought about 3 weeks from now, and 6 months from now, and the December exhibition and the September canvases she hadn't started yet, and the woman in Lexington with 2 paintings on her wall that told a story with a beginning and an ending. And she thought about all the things that were still becoming, and were not yet finished, and did not need to be. She went back to Shelbyville that afternoon. Mrs. Pruitt was in the front room when she came in, pretending to read, which meant she had been watching for the carriage. Well, she said. Evelyn set down her bag. She took off her coat. She looked at Mrs. Pruitt with the clear, steady gaze she had been developing for 5 months. The gaze of a woman who had learned to look at things as they actually were. Arthur Finch wants a full exhibition in December, she said. My work only. 12 to 15 pieces. Mrs. Pruitt blinked. That's significant. It is, Evelyn said. And the other thing? Mrs. Pruitt said. The husband. He's coming in 3 weeks. For the accounts. Mrs. Pruitt studied her. Just the accounts? No, Evelyn said. Not just the accounts. But the accounts are what we can say out loud right now. Which is enough. Mrs. Pruitt looked at her for a long moment. Then she did something Evelyn had never seen her do. She smiled. Not the small, contained satisfaction she allowed herself occasionally. A real one. Warm and full and entirely genuine. I'll keep the room available, she said. As long as you need it. I may need it a while longer, Evelyn said. Good, Mrs. Pruitt said. It's the best room in the house. Evelyn laughed and went upstairs. She painted that evening until the lamp burned low. The canvas she was working on was the first of the September pieces she had started it 2 days ago. The morning after she'd agreed to the December show. With the particular urgency of a woman who has just said yes to something large and needs to begin immediately, or she'll spend too long thinking about it. It was a painting of a woman at a table, not the last evening, not the still hands and the cold candles in the moment of perfect paralysis before a life changes. Something different. This woman was also at a table. But she was leaning forward, and her hands were moving. And there was a canvas in front of her, and light coming from the side. And the quality of the room around her was the quality of a room that belongs entirely to the person in it. She did not have a title yet. She worked until the light was too low, and then she set down the brush and cleaned it carefully. And she looked at what she had made the beginning of it. The first real marks of it, and she thought, yes. This one. She turned down the lamp. In the dark, before sleep. She thought about Nathaniel correcting column 3 by himself. With his careful imperfect arithmetic and his honest effort and the ledger she had notated from the beginning so that it could be understood by a man who was willing to try. She thought about Clara in Richmond, writing letters she'd promised to send every week. She thought about Arthur Finch in Louisville, planning a December show with the efficient certainty of a man who knows good work when he's found it. She thought about the woman in the threshold painting, hanging on a gallery wall in Louisville, in a room she no longer occupied because she had finally walked through the door. And then Evelyn Harper Painter, accountant, woman of 28 years, who had walked out of a house before dawn with 6 brushes in her coat pocket and had built. From those 6 brushes and her own clear mind and the absolute refusal to disappear completely. A life that was entirely, irreversibly, gloriously her own, pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes and slept without waiting for anyone's permission. She had found herself. That was the beginning and the middle. And the whole of the story, and it was enough, and it was hers. And nobody was ever going to take it from her again.